the biggest mistake would probably just be like trying to be too perfect from the start. Overcomplicating it is a great way to ensure that you hate it. The best thing to do is keep it super simple. If you want to do editorial style newsletter, just like write a couple of paragraphs, send it out. If you want to do like a curation style newsletter, put a couple of links in. Like I would say start as small as you possibly can.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Creator Business Show. My name is Chikodi Chima, and today I am joined by Lesley Sim. She's going to join us from Singapore. She is co-founder of Newsletter Glue. Newsletter Glue helps you publish your newsletter from a blog post. You don't have to take a blog post and then put it into your newsletter tool. You do it all from an API feed into your newsletter. Saves a ton of time. You don't have to mess around with formatting. So it's a great way to just save hours a day in your publishing process. Newsletter Glue was started from a feature in another company that Lesley created with her co-founder. They shut down the company. It was a membership site and people weren't using it. So the feature that she loved and other people liked ended up being a company on its own. We're going to talk about ways that you can improve your newsletter experience for your readers, get feedback and turn that into content. Also, how you can shape the experience of reading so that people are anchored in your newsletter experience. Newsletter Tips is a project that Lesley is working on. So we're gonna go over a lot of newsletter tips. Gonna get a lot of great information, and I think you're gonna love it. So stay tuned for today's edition of the Creator Business Show. Lesley, thank you so much for joining us. Do you want to give us a quick introduction and tell us about Newsletter Glue?
Yeah. First, hi. Hi, Chikodi. Super nice to meet you, and thanks for having me on the show. I run a WordPress plugin called Newsletter Glue, and what we do is allow people to write newsletters the way that they write blog posts. So, pull up the blog editor, type stuff in, throw in a bunch of images, and send that out as a newsletter to all your subscribers. And it's just kind of like a much easier way of doing things rather than going into MailChimp, for example, and wrestling with the editor over there, which is not optimized for actual writing.
And so how did you get started with Newsletter Glue?
At the time, Substack was getting really popular, and I kind of wanted similar functionality, but for my WordPress site. And I just prefer WordPress personally because I've been working in it for a long time, and I like all the options you get. I can choose my own theme. I can add all specific features that I want. And in my case, I wanted the ability to just type a post and just send that out. And I realized there wasn't a way to do that at the time. And I was like, okay, let's build this. So at the time, my co-founder and I were working on a different plugin, a membership plugin. And we were having trouble getting it off the ground. There wasn't much traction for it, just because I think the membership space is pretty mature and quite crowded, which I'm sure people at Pico also feel. So we were having trouble there. And this despite the fact that my co-founder has been building membership plugins for the past 10 years. He's built plugins with hundreds of thousands of users and decided to come out on his own. And we partnered up and we tried to get a new membership plugin off the ground, and it was difficult. And at the time we were like, okay, this is not working. What should we do? But we built this small feature into our membership plugin that allowed us to send posts as newsletters. And I wasn't too sad about the membership plugin shutting down, but I was sad about that tiny feature because I use that feature. And, I was like, wait a minute, if I'm sad about this feature going away, maybe other people would be sad or care about this feature too, because it wasn't possible. There are a lot of membership plugins, but there weren't a lot of other plugins doing this specific feature. And so I realized there's an opportunity here to spin up that feature into a whole plugin. And that's kind of how it all started.
Well, thank you for that. It's quite interesting what you said too, that MailChimp, a lot of these newsletter platforms are not actually optimized for writing. They're optimized for sending. They're optimized for automation. You can get whatever information about the readers and the open rate and what have you, but you can't write. That seems so simple, and yet that's really powerful. So talk about how you went from being sad about a feature that you liked in a product you had built to actually testing it in the market and getting the confirmation from others that this is something that they would use. And obviously it's newsletter glue, but talk about the kind of research process that went from a feature to actually being a company.
We had the luxury of having had a failed product, so all the pain and mistakes that we made there, I made sure to not make those mistakes again. So with the membership plugin, we didn't tell anybody, didn't do any research, didn't do customer discovery interviews, any of those things. We were like, okay, we're confident that we can build a membership plugin, and then we just built it. So it's like classic bad approach. And then with newsletter glue, having already made all the mistakes the first time around, I knew that we wanted to build in public from day one. So a couple of things I did. I started getting really active on Twitter, joined indie hackers, wrote a bunch of posts there, talked to people on there like, hey, I think my first post was something like Substack for WordPress, like ? And then I wrote this whole thing on like, if we built this plugin that lets you send posts as newsletters on WordPress, would you be interested? And like a bunch of like the reasons why we're doing it. And I mean, this sounds small, but at the time, given where we were coming from, it wasn't small. But we got like, I don't know, maybe 40 or 50 comments of people like really interested, wanting to find out more. And I used like kind of like the same wording and paraphrased it and asked again on a bunch of Facebook groups, like newsletter Facebook groups. And also, I think maybe on Twitter. And so we kind of slowly got maybe 90 interested people. And then that filtered down into maybe, I want to say, 10 customer discovery interviews. And yeah, that kind of gave us the confidence that it was something that people wanted. And we tried to build something really small to begin with. And I think like within the first week, we got maybe like 10 random people signing up and using our free plugin, which again sounds small, but it's different when like you're coming from zero. Like me and my co-founder, we weren't like, internet celebrities with 10,000 or 100,000
you are
followers.
Now, but you weren't.
Well, I still don't have, but that's the thing. I feel like, especially on Twitter, you see these people with like, 100,000 followers, and it's like they tweet one thing and then, boom, overnight success, $1 million business in a month.
Blakey Mall from Float.
Yeah, exactly right.
But it does sound like you did the hard part, which is testing an idea with the market before going and building out the whole thing, which is definitely easier than shutting down a whole company. So this time you did that and you got validation. And yeah, like you said, having a random person that just likes what you've built because it solves a problem for them is, like if I've made $1 on something from somebody I don't know, that's the best dollar you ever make. So that sounds like you got to that point. And who were the people that gave you the good feedback that you said, okay, people like this, if there's one of them, there's 1,000 of them. So describe the profile of your early users and the pain that you were solving for them.
The interesting thing is that I originally thought that I'd be able to move a bunch of people from Substack over to WordPress, and that's turned out generally pretty wrong. What turned out to be like a good user profile for us is people who are already on WordPress, who are kind of sick and tired of jumping between WordPress and their email service provider to reformat, copy and paste stuff and send that newsletter out. So that was kind of a learning journey for me as well. And again, also the other thing was at the beginning, I thought we talked to a lot of like creator types, like people who identify as creators. Again, that's turned out like not really right, in the sense that I think a lot of creators or like people who identify themselves as creators in like the year 2020 or 2021 tend to want to use like a simple platform. Whereas the people that we kind of appeal to a lot are like professionals, people who have WordPress businesses, like agencies, or see themselves as professional publishers and want to graduate or upgrade from something simple. So that's also been kind of an interesting journey for us.
That's still a lot of people.
Yeah.
You know, WordPress is the dominant publishing platform. There's a lot of competitors nipping at its heels, but WordPress is still gargantuan. And then how much time does Newsletter Glue save a professional publisher or your ideal user?
So I'd say easily an hour. We've got a bunch of testimonials of people who like randomly write on Twitter and be like, you know, I love, let's say, ActiveCampaign, but now that I'm using Newsletter Glue to send out the newsletter, it's saved me an hour or 2 hours. And it's just like way less painful. And I can still use ActiveCampaign or MailChimp or MailerLite for the segmentation, for the automation, which I love. But now that I'm not writing in there anymore, it's much less of a headache, like much less buggy and all of those things.
Is Newsletter Glue porting over the post that is being written, drafted in WordPress, and then dumps it into ActiveCampaign, MailerLite, ConvertKit, these other tools?
Yeah, so we send via API. So what that means is when you publish the blog post, it kind of goes like in the background via those email service providers and sends it out.
These internet tubes.
Yeah, these internet tubes. So you don't have to like publish the post and then like head over to MailChimp and then like publish it again. So the whole thing feels really, really seamless.
That's great. And how many people are using it now?
We have maybe 300 customers right now.
Congratulations. That's wonderful.
Thanks.
From a failed membership platform to 300 customers because you went and talked to people who need this. And so what are the people doing with the time that they're not having to reformat and drag everything over from one platform to another?
So I think the biggest deal is with consistency. And like, you know, we were just talking about how hard it is to consistently publish a podcast, right? Like you're saying it's like 7 episodes or something and people tend to drop off. So with newsletters, it tends to be like 20 issues and then people tend to burn out or get bored of it or don't see the growth that they were hoping to see. Part of that drag is also just kind of how much of a pain it is to publish the newsletter. And so we have customers who say that I've been bad about being consistent with my newsletters because I'm managing my blog, which is like a whole thing to manage. And then after that, I have to manage my newsletter. And so like the newsletter kind of falls aside. And it's because we've made that whole process a lot easier that they're now able to publish consistently. So I think like that's the big thing that ends up happening, which I'm pretty happy about.
And what benefits do people see from being able to publish a regular newsletter?
I think it's just like building a relationship. So the way I like to look at it is blogging is great for being able to get found on the internet, like via search engines, but it's not as intimate. Whereas email is more intimate. People can just hit reply and, you know, if there's something that they want to respond. And I encourage all newsletter writers also to encourage their readers to respond. It's like good for building the relationship, but also good for deliverability. And yeah, so I think like people feel like they get to know you a lot better when they read your stuff in their inbox. Yeah, and so like when you publish your newsletter on your WordPress site, you kind of get the best of both worlds. You get, you know, the search engine discoverability, easy links that you can share. It's not going to be some crazy like algorithm link because like your newsletters are now just blog posts, right? So it can be, you know, trypico.com/whatever post name you want to give it.
And you get the intimate language that you would use in a newsletter as opposed to blog post for SEO and for...
Yeah, you just kind of get the best of both worlds, which is really nice.
What other tips do you give to newsletter publishers to improve their performance?
It's one of those projects that I wish was off the ground by now, but it's still a work in progress. But I'm actually creating like a side project called Newsletter Tips. And the URL is really easy. It's newsletter.tips. And
nice.
It's a work in progress, but you can go over there right now and sign up. And it's like daily tips to improve your newsletter. And there are so many tips. Like I plan on doing like 50 to 100 of them. So it's hard for me to tell you right now like what the tips would be. Like what I don't even know what my biggest tip would be, but a tip that I like to talk about is having a before you go section just above the footer. And over there you can, tell people like to share your newsletter or like where to find you, or to encourage people to reply. And you can just kind of have that permanently at the bottom of your newsletter, and it feels really nice. So I like doing that. And one thing that I don't see very often, but I also like doing, is having like a permanent introduction, like what this newsletter is at the top of each newsletter. And it can feel kind of ridiculous from your perspective if you're sending it out every week. You're like, okay, of course my subscribers know that, this is a crypto newsletter. But from a subscriber perspective, if they're receiving 5, 10, 20 newsletters every day or every week, like they might forget you, right? They might forget what exactly it is they're reading.
Mm-hmm.
And so just kind of having that, like, this is a weekly or your favorite weekly crypto newsletter or something like that. Like just having that tiny line there really, really helps set the tone.
It's a really good point. I get email newsletters that I know that I subscribe to, and they've got one that I see that always grabs my attention is called The Signal, but I don't remember when I subscribed to it or why. And I have that guilt about unsubscribing, but I don't read it. I'm not a regular reader. So really basic stuff, it sounds like, are great ways to deepen your connection with a newsletter. So you said have a before you go section, and you can have certain calls to action and certain fun stuff, and then just a static description of what it is.
Yeah. And it's like one line, small font, 14 pixels or something, that you don't have to have it the same size as the rest. And regular subscribers, they kind of like mentally just go straight to the content. But then someone like you, who signed up for something and you've kind of forgotten, you want to know like, what is this? Like, what benefit am I getting from reading this?
Yeah.
So yeah, super helpful.
That is a really good point. When I'm actually writing a blog or something, or, drafting something for one of my clients, being really descriptive and putting the obvious information in there, even if it's obvious to you or I, it doesn't make me angry that there's, as the reader, if I already know something, like you said, it just kind of, I skim past it. But if I didn't know and it wasn't there, I would feel lost. And the fact that it is there makes me feel grounded and helps me with my orientation. So those are really simple things. Now that we're on the topic, what are some other simple things that people can do to improve their newsletter experience?
In general, wayfinding is really important. And, this is also good advice for any design on the internet. But with newsletters, especially like longer editorial style ones, like it's all one column. And when someone scrolls, there isn't like a sticky banner that reminds them, where they are and kind of gives them a framework for what they're reading and what's happening. And so being really aware, I guess, of how someone can start to feel lost in a newsletter is really important. So you want to make sure that your sections are really clear and structured.
So H1s and H2s, no huge walls of text.
Yeah. But also huge walls of text is fine, if that's kind of your thing. But like, let's say you want to do like huge wall of text, and then, like cool links I found online this week. And then like, I don't know, like cool tweets I found this week. And then, call to action about my course. Then like, you want to make sure that all of that is structured in like a very clear and easy to understand way. You don't want to use different, or like if you want to have different sections, like make sure the sections are carved out in like a consistent way so that people kind of know, okay, it's going to be chunk of text, and then like the H2 is formatted in the same way as the next H2, and so on and so forth. And even just kind of, I'm a big fan of labels as well. So if you're going to do like chunk of text, H2 with like funny headline, then on top of the headline, you want to have a label that says weekly link sharing or something like that, and so on and so forth. So
and since we're actually talking to people who can't necessarily see and don't know what an H2 is, an H2 is what you tell your editor to make the formatting of the paragraph heading. So H2 is kind of in the middle size. H1 is really big and H3 is small. So when you see large titles in a blog post or an email newsletter, the largest font is probably an H1. So it's header 1. For those who don't, since we're talking about wayfinding and since we're talking about being uber descriptive.
Yeah, the way I like to think of it is like you're making a list, right? So it's like 1 is the H1, and then you like tab, and then you're like the inner, like what's the word, insert? Yeah, and then
indent.
Yeah, that's right. And then so it's like I, and then and so like that's kind of the way to think about H1, H2, because like formatting is one thing, but it's also kind of thinking of everything as like a structured list.
And then where did this passion and interest in newsletter performance come from?
I'm not sure. I guess like personally, I'm a big fan of reading newsletters, and I subscribe to way too many of them. And like, so one of my favorite newsletters is Dense Discovery, and Kai, who writes it, I think he's a designer by trade. And so you can see how super structured every section is. He has like so many sections in his newsletter, like maybe 10 or 15 of them, like a crazy amount. But because it's all super, super clear and well structured and well designed, you don't feel lost, and you kind of like grow to love to like, I'm expecting this next. I'm expecting this next. And it's like reading a magazine, because he actually, I think his main job is writing a print magazine. And so I guess he like takes that approach into his newsletter, and you can really tell how easy it is to kind of read it. Yeah, so like I guess that was my big inspiration for starting my own newsletter, and it's also my inspiration when it comes to newsletter design.
And what are the most common mistakes that newsletter publishers make, and what happens when they make these mistakes?
So again, I think formatting tends to be a big one. Like even big, well-known publishers tend to do this. The wayfinding is hard. So like once you scroll like down 3 times, you don't know what you're reading anymore and where you're at. So a simple example of this is like if you have 3 sections of links, and if you're like mid-scroll in a section of links, you don't know like what kind of links these are anymore. That tends to be pretty confusing. Aside from that, I think the biggest mistake would probably just be like trying to be too perfect from the start. I think a lot of people kind of go in and they're like, what's my tech stack? How do I like do this like fancy referral system? How do I, start ads on my newsletter? How do I do like 10 different things? I think overcomplicating it is a great way to ensure that you hate it and decide not to do it after a while. So I think the best thing to do is keep it super simple. If you want to do editorial style newsletter, just like write a couple of paragraphs, send it out. If you want to do like a curation style newsletter, put a couple of links in, like top 5 links. I write a weekly newsletter now where I send 1 link, just because I felt like 2 links or 3 links was too overwhelming given like my day job. So like I send 1 link. So if people, like want to do things, like I would say start as small as you possibly can, get to 20 issues, see if you love it. If you don't, that's fine. Newsletters like podcasting is not for everyone. And then when that happens and you decide to just shut it down, you'll be happy that you didn't spend ages and ages over optimizing everything. And if you get to 20 issues and you decide that you love it, then that's the time where you can double down and do all the fancy stuff.
Yeah, that reminds me, actually, back in the day, I had another podcast and we got to 7 episodes, and I also was using Aweber for my newsletter. And I don't know how many newsletters I sent out, but everything took so much time that the joy of creation really got swallowed up by the necessity of editing, publishing, proofreading, all of it. So it's when it's a business, then if I guess it's good to think about where does the joy come from and be able to focus on some of the joy. And so your suggestion or your recommendation is really keep it very simple so you can do the same thing over and over again and get better and get more comfortable and gain confidence.
Yeah. So my friend Ernie Smith has this newsletter that he sends out. And the thing about it is that he has a half an hour time limit for writing and sending it out. And yeah, I love that. Like it ensures that you don't, get too perfect about it. And it just forces you
You're
to...
there for the journey with him. It sounds like if he's saying every email newsletter you read from me is written, published, sent out within 30 minutes. So it's just gonzo, straight from my typewriter to you.
Yeah. It's amazing how like high quality the newsletter is as well. Like I constantly reply to his newsletters and be like, it's mind blowing that you've written this in 30 minutes. And yeah, so I try to do the same for my one link newsletter. I have a tendency of being too perfectionist about things as well and overcomplicating things. I also try to, spend only 30 minutes writing it out. And again, it's like just one link. And I think that has helped me a lot in staying consistent as well.
Why do you think people try to get too perfect with their newsletters?
It's fun. Like if you're into it and you're like, oh, I need to, add this extra section or add this extra point and I need to edit and curate, and you just kind of, get sucked in, and it can be fun. But then like once you are 20 issues in or 50 issues in, you start to feel burnt out and it just starts to get overwhelming. So having guardrails in place that save you from yourself, I think is super important.
So we're talking about newsletter creation. Can you walk us through what it's actually like to consume a newsletter from the viewer's perspective? What's the viewer looking for in a high quality newsletter and a high quality newsletter experience? Yeah,
so I guess all the suggestions I made are also from like a reader's perspective. So like the wayfinding type stuff. And I think like one other thing is I like really simple and repetitive newsletters. Like I receive a bunch of long form newsletters and I have to admit that I don't read all of them. Like I don't read every single issue, just because, I don't always have the time to spend 15, 20 minutes reading a single email. In comparison, I receive, I'm not sure what it's called. I think it's called Workplaces XYZ or something like that, by this guy, Ryan Gilbert, maybe. He sends, I think, like a twice weekly newsletter out, and it's just images of people's workspaces. He just like finds guests on Twitter and gets them to take pictures of their workspaces, and then he just emails that out. And it's nice because like I'm interested in workspace stuff, and I like looking at nice pictures. And it takes, it's like 30 seconds to go from start to finish with his newsletters. And I read like almost every single one of those. And it's so much easier. I mean, it's like the amount of time he spends on this is probably way less time than someone who's writing, 2,000 words, like this like extensive expose on like Facebook's rebranding or something. And like I appreciate that in-depth article, but I don't always have the time or like mental bandwidth to go and read and consume that. But I always have time for 30 seconds. This is going to make me mad.
Yeah. This is going to make me mad. I don't think I'm going to read this today.
Yeah. But I always have like 30 seconds to look at, pictures of nice workspaces.
Yeah. That reminds me actually. So predictability in a newsletter and pleasure, joy is going to go a long way. There's I don't read it anymore. She probably still publishes it because she did it for so long. But Swiss Miss, Tina Roth Eisenberg.
Yeah.
Just, here's this cute thing that I found, or here's a fun, mostly focused on fun. And, then she started a company called Tatley to do, cool temporary tattoos. And she ran a workspace.
Nice.
With Greg Narayan, we were talking about parasocial relationships where as you get older, it's harder to maintain friendships, even with people you grew up with. But then influencers have your trust. You trust them to give you their opinion on certain things. And so definitely newsletters can be that as well. Just to your point about the workplaces, there are newsletter influencers out there who are very loved by the people who know them and invisible to everybody else. But because of the scale of the internet, the fact that everybody has an email or has multiple emails, they could be sending out 100,000 emails a day.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, like, just to be clear, I'm not saying don't write the 2,000 word newsletter. Like, I do read those too. I don't read them all the time.
Hey, I definitely feel guilt if I unsubscribe from a newsletter, because when I was publishing and I had a very small audience, I actually took the time to look at every new sign up, because there's only a couple a day, and it's like, okay, all of these Gmails, I'm looking for people subscribing from their corporate email account, but it's mostly Gmail. So I knew the health of my email newsletter. That is a good observation, though. It's just being predictable. It also makes it easier for you as the publisher, because you know what you're going to do. Drew Riley with trends.vc has he didn't get there overnight, but he's got a very clear format of how he presents information about, it's a different industry. So it'll be, single person, $1 million businesses, or the creator economy, or NFTs, or franchising, or what have you, but it's the same format. And so the information just goes in one place. And as the reader, I know where to look and how to skim and what parts I'm going to like ahead of time.
Yeah. And I think, like, as a creator, you sometimes worry that if things are too predictable or too structured, it can feel like you're dialing it in, just kind of putting stuff out there mindlessly. But from a reader's perspective, that it never feels that way. It actually feels nice when it's predictable. So it's, it's like good on both sides. Like, it's much easier as a creator to have a clear template and just kind of like fill in the blanks every week. It saves you so much time from having to reinvent the wheel every week. And also your readers actually do appreciate it. They don't feel like you're dialing it in or that you're just mindlessly filling out a template.
What are you excited about in the newsletter publisher space?
So I'm going to talk about one of my features. And it's self-promotional, but I also am genuinely excited about it. So with us, because you're publishing stuff on your WordPress site, it allows you to really blur the lines between a blog and a newsletter. And one of our features is you're able to take like blocks of content and decide if you want to show it in the blog post or hide it, and versus show it in the newsletter. And so that lets you do everything, like create the same piece of content, and then, like, for example, have a secret coupon for your newsletter subscribers that's hidden from your blog post, and you just like toggle off show in blog post. Or you're able to have subscriber forms in your newsletter itself, and then like toggle off show in newsletter, and so that shows up online in your newsletter archive. Because like, how like blog posts often have like subscriber forms in the middle of the blog post, because like if you're enjoying the content, you want to subscribe. Newsletters don't have that, simply because it's, it doesn't make sense to have
it's already in your inbox.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Right. But like, it makes sense to have that in the archive, because if someone's, shared the link to a newsletter issue to their friends and stuff, you want to have that subscriber form in there. Like, we make that really simple because it's just like a toggle on and off, show in blog post, show in newsletter. Yeah, so like our customers really enjoy that. So we have one customer who basically publishes all of her blog posts as newsletters, and the only difference is that each newsletter starts with an intro, like a more kind of personal intro, which she hides from her blog posts, because she obviously doesn't want the random readers finding her from Google reading this like thing about her day. Whereas her subscribers like love that part of the,
because they're subscribed, they want
exactly.
They opted in.
So like, I think that there's more and more of that kind of stuff going on. Like, there's like a blurring of what you put in your blog post, what you put in your newsletter, what you put on in your tweets. Like, people are repurposing content a lot more, kind of just making it easy from a platform perspective to help people do that. I think is really cool. I've been enjoying like seeing that as well. Like, like I mentioned tweets. So like people repurposing blog posts as tweets. Like if, there are plugins and there are platforms out there that make that simple as well. That whole blurring the lines thing is really cool for me. And I guess that's why we try to do that as well with our plugin.
Yeah. Have you heard of the Thanksgiving turkey strategy?
No.
Have you been to an American Thanksgiving?
One, but I'm not sure how representative it was.
For those people who are not Americans and have not been to a Thanksgiving, the central entree is a turkey, and a turkey is a big bird, much bigger than a chicken, and you can get more than one meal out of a turkey. So you slice the turkey, and everybody has their fill, then gets really sleepy because it's full of tryptophan on Thanksgiving. And then maybe you wake up from your
food coma,
tryptophan coma, food coma, and then you have another couple slices Thanksgiving night, but then you still have lots of leftovers. So then you have turkey sandwiches and you make soup and, all of these things. So that's what's really powerful about content repurposing is maybe you have one long form post, but then you slice it up into tweets or you put it in your email newsletter, but you get a lot more meal out of one bird. You get a lot more engagement and a lot more contact with your audience out of one long form piece. And the tools and technology we have really make that doable. How can people take feedback from their readers to make their newsletter experience better?
I guess ask people all the time, like encourage responses, things like that. Yeah. So like, for example, in my before you go section, I do ask people to, hit reply and let me know what they thought of this issue. So that's like just kind of always in there. And people reply to my newsletters all the time, which I really love.
Yeah, the Hustle does that. Every issue of the Hustle says at the bottom, how are we doing? And there's a smiley face and an angry face. And then it takes you to a Google form and they say, what article did you like? What should we write about next time? And I mean, that's a multi-million-dollar newsletter because they got acquired by HubSpot. So you can just imagine how many comments they actually get about things.
Yeah.
So if it wasn't working, they would take it out. So it's clearly still working.
Yeah. And just doing that on Twitter as well, like writing, short form versions of your newsletter as tweets and asking people like for their feedback. And like just having, I don't know, like even on Twitter, like having like a vibe where you actually respond to people. You're not just dumping links all the time. Like I think your vibe matters. And if you're always responding to people and like having conversations on Twitter, like people get that that's your thing and they start to respond more. You can't like do the dumps all the time and just be like, hey, give me feedback, and then be surprised when people don't respond.
Right. Well, that's an interesting point too, because I saw something about should your Twitter feed be a magazine or a reality show? And I don't share that much about my life, but I think that a magazine might be too curated and too manicured. But there is definitely a way to work the Twitter system so that you show up in people's feed and you get engagement. But yeah, being a real person and using it to communicate is my preference, and I prefer people that even if they have a Twitter audience, that they're actually using it to communicate on a one-to-one basis in public. I think that's really cool.
Yeah. Oh, I have one more tip with regards to getting feedback. So my friend Swix does this. Basically, like when people respond to his emails, like to his newsletters, he then turns that into content for his next newsletter. So like, let's say I wrote something about, I don't know, angry cats, and then you replied to that email and be like, hey, check out my picture of an angry cat. And then I'll be like, hey, would you mind if I share this on my next newsletter? And then you'd obviously feel happy about that, hopefully. And then after
Reader
that,
Lesley said that this about angry cats. So there's that continuity from one to the next.
Yeah. And then people get that you're replying and you're engaging because like you've kind of subtly indicated that. And that kind of encourages people to respond even more.
Nice. Kind of like you're in a community You feel like you're bonded to other people reading because it's like, oh, I'm not the only person reading this. Other people are reading this too and responding.
Yeah, exactly.
That's really clever. I'm so used to newsletters and certainly the professionalization of newsletters. But, what's really eye-opening and fun about this conversation is just thinking about how flexible the format is and how certain people have a lot of fun with it and don't take themselves seriously and are able to, create a whole experience based on a newsletter and based on an email address. And that really a lot is possible, even if you're using a clunky publishing tool. Any other newsletter tips?
An easy one, I guess, is segmentation. So my friend Simon, he writes 3 newsletters every week. One is for, he's like a MailChimp partner or something, agency partner. And so he writes like a MailChimp newsletter. And then he also does like WordPress work. So it's like Mondays are MailChimp days, Wednesdays are WordPress days, and Fridays are, I can't remember. I think I don't subscribe to his Friday newsletter. And that just kind of like gives people the option to know what they want to subscribe to. And I think that's really cool because once you get into the routine, it's not a whole bunch of extra work. If you're already embedded in those communities, to then like curate links from those communities and throw them into a newsletter and send it out. And from a reader's perspective, it's cool because you feel that you're getting super specific industry information, and it almost feels like it's curated for you, which is really nice.
That's a really good point. Segmentation is that if it's not for you, it's not for you. I'm taking Building a Second Brain with Tiago Forte, and he said that value is not distributed evenly. You have to hunt for it. And you might get more value in one paragraph or one sentence than an entire blog post, an entire newsletter. And it's up to you to discern what that is. And if something is just not relevant, it really is taking up your time and wasting your life. So you're doing your readers a favor and you're doing yourself a favor as the reader to really be more ruthless about segmenting yourself or segmenting your readers. So I definitely appreciate that as well as a tip about segmentation.
Yeah.
Any other tips for the newsletter enthusiasts out here?
I think one other one, especially this is good if you have like a big but maybe not that engaged audience. Don't be afraid to like stick a huge thing right at the top and be like, hey, if you don't like this, unsubscribe. Because it gets you a ton of unsubscribes, but then it also gets you a more engaged audience, which is amazing for deliverability. So, like, would you rather 10,000 subscribers but like a 10% open rate, or would you rather have 1,000 subscribers with an 80% open rate? I'd even argue like from a profitability standpoint, like if you were trying to sell people things, like having 1,000 subscribers with an 80% open rate is probably going to get you more money than 10,000 unengaged subscribers. So yeah, like don't be afraid of unsubscribe rates. It's actually like a good sign that list is self-cleaning. So like I've seen a bunch of newsletters do that occasionally as well. Like just stick a whole like this like huge banner right at the top, like, hey, like, I'm just cleaning my list, or I'm, something like that. And if you want to unsubscribe, no worries, like no hard feelings. Here's how you can do it. I think that's really cool. And then the flip side of that is like, don't care so much about metrics. So one of the best things that I did for my newsletter is like I turn up all notifications of new subscribers, unsubscribes, open rate, all of that. I don't even look at it. All I'm focused on personally is making sure that I send something out weekly. And even that for me is hard. Maybe once a month or like once every 2 months, I get curious and I go in and see how many subscribers I have. But just kind of turning all of that stuff off is so good for your mental health, because you're not worried.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's so depressing if you get a ton of unsubscribes and just, it doesn't actually change anything. Like if you're enjoying writing your newsletter, and if you have people who are enjoying reading it, it doesn't matter if some people don't. So just kind of like turning off the email notifications is a good thing to do. Obviously, if you're, a professional publication, you can't do that if your job depends on it. But if you're a creator, you're doing it for yourself, that's something that I would recommend actually.
Are you familiar with Talking Shrimp?
Talking Shrimp? No.
Laura Belgray. I think she's certainly an elite company of one of the most prolific newsletter writers, and she is herself a copywriter. And so her headlines every single day are different. It's like she's a
Whoa.
comedy writer, and I can't unsubscribe. I don't read her stuff. No offense if you're seeing this. Like, I just don't read it, but I read every headline every day because it's just, I mean, it's like she is so determined and she's so good at what she does. And then she has a kind of creative partner, if you will, Selena Sue, who's a more of a celebrity publicist or a publicist for personality entrepreneurs, I think is how you would probably say it. And she publishes pretty much every day an email newsletter too. But the two of them are just so good at headline writing that it's like, I can't unsubscribe even if I can't read it. There's power in that, words.
Yeah, and I think it's like so useful for people to know as well, like when a subscriber says something like that and they're like, I don't actually read the emails, but I love getting the subject lines. It's like, this is another reason why you shouldn't care about things like open rates and subscribes and unsubscribes, because you don't actually know how that translates into actual reader behavior or reader sentiment. Because like, if there was like 1,000 of you of people who just love the subject lines, like she'll look at the open rates and be like, why are my open rates so crap? Like, but actually it's because readers love the subject lines and they don't have time to look beyond that.
And her personality too, I don't think she's actually desperate, but she kind of is like that desperate friend that like is super needy and needs you to read it. So it's like, it's like, it really works on a lot of levels. I can't even tell you the last time I read one of her email newsletters. It's probably been 9 months, but I still feel like I have a relationship with her just based on the fact that she writes good headlines.
That's amazing. Now I have to subscribe to check out those headlines.
Yeah. Louis Nichols, who was on the show a couple of weeks ago, he doesn't unsubscribe for anything.
Oh, wow.
And he keeps an archive of all of the bad emails, all the bad cold emails he gets, all the bad newsletters, because it's like, even then you can learn something. You can diagram out what doesn't work for you and what needs to change. And that can be helpful too.
Interesting.
But again, I mean, to quote the incredible Tiago Forte, is that you need to be consuming to be a creator. And it changes your relationship to consumption a lot. If you're consuming just to consume and you're like, I have to get through everything on Twitter, it becomes really overwhelming. When you absorb information to then put it back out in the world, you have to be a lot more ruthless with your time. And it's really beneficial. So from the perspective of a newsletter, it's like, yeah, if you're subscribing, I mean, certain people, Lesley, just to subscribe to 100 email newsletters, but, because that's what they like. If you're subscribing to be a publisher, then your time is really valuable as well.
So like the advice there is to not consume so much and make sure you're putting stuff out there.
Well, I mean, you have a newsletter tool, so you're covered. It just really makes me think about what my information diet is. There are many people that publish email newsletters in many different formats, but the one for you really can change your day, like the workplaces one. That's a little bit of escapism. If you're in Singapore, you're probably not traveling, but then you get to travel all around the world and, all around the city to people's workplaces because the email newsletter format. And you probably wouldn't go to a blog to see that. Maybe you would, but there's just something special about it in a newsletter.
Yeah, I think so. So one of the things that I've realized is that over the pandemic, I started watching so much video. Like you would not believe, I think like 6 hours of video a day.
I believe.
And like 6 hours sounds like ridiculous, but if you think about it, so I used to watch maybe 2 hours during lunchtime. Like, I watch something during lunch and then be like, oh, I'll watch another episode of whatever. And then that becomes 2 hours. Mm-hmm. And then like after dinner, you're like, I don't have anything to do because I can't go anywhere. Then you're watching like another 4 hours of, crap. And it's, it's like, am I really watching 6 hours of video stuff like every single day? That's insane. And I realized my sleep was getting affected and I was tired all the time. And I didn't initially attribute that to watching a bunch of stuff online. But once I stopped, the most amazing thing was like in the second day when I like completely cut out all video, I woke up at 6:30 and went for a run. Like that doesn't happen. And then since then it's kind of tapered down, and it's no longer like I've started watching like some stuff again, but I try to be more deliberate about it. Like, okay, I'm only going to watch one episode, and then I'm going to like shut my laptop and go do something else. But yeah, it just like goes back to the, the diet, like information diet stuff.
Yeah.
And like how much time you're actually wasting chilling out. It's not that relaxing, and it doesn't give you more energy. It's actually sapping energy, even though you think that you're chilling out watching videos. Yeah. So I've like been on this thing. I've been talking about this for a while the past month, because it's like,
no, thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah, it's changed everything.
I just bought a new mountain bike.
Nice.
And haven't gotten to ride it. So even though it's now, almost 10 o'clock p.m., I'm going to go for a ride because Golden Gate Park is down the street. But the diet is so crucial. And it just makes me think of how addictive all of our products are. And we're really not aware of it. Even though Nir Eyal wrote Hooked and really breaks down how there's 4 parts to technology addiction, and it's built into everything we do on a day-to-day basis. We don't think about it. We just think, oh man, this show is so good, or, whatever the thing is. So thank you for bringing that up. You've been really generous with your time. Is there anything you want to leave the viewers and listeners with before we depart?
Come check out my site, newsletterglue.com. I'm super active on Twitter as well. My handle is Lesley, Lesley.pizza. So pretty easy to find. I'm Lesley.pizza everywhere else on the internet as well. So if you search for me, I should pop up. I like hanging out with people online. So easy to find, easy to contact. Come say hi.
And your personal newsletter?
My personal newsletter is enough.pizza. And that just kind of talks about the concept of enough. Like, what does it mean to not constantly want to consume more and more or upgrade your life? Like, what if you're content with your life, and like what that means and how you can go about getting there? Yeah, so I share 1 link a week. Super easy. I try to spend half an hour writing it only. So you can subscribe there as well.
Well, Lesley, thank you so much for being a guest today on the Creator Business Show. Really enjoyed learning from you about how to make the newsletter experience better, and also thank you for sharing some of your favorite newsletters, what the publishers do well. Thank you for telling us your story about how Newsletter Glue came to be from a failed startup. Really appreciate your time. Would love to have you back anytime.
Thanks so much, Chikodi. Hope you have a great ride tonight.
Thank you so much.